Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by asking a question. Can I see a show of hands as to anyone in the room who's actually used their phone to search or browse the internet? Show of hands, bit of exercise after lunch. Okay, that's most people in the room, so then this statement probably is not going to make sense to you. No one will ever use their phone to search or browse the web. This is a comment from a story that's very, very, very dear to my heart. I've spent the past 10 years working in mobile search research, and when I was doing my PhD, one of the first papers that I attempted to get published looked at alternative interfaces for mobile search. The idea was to try and use the limited screen real estate to our advantage. So I was super excited. So excited about my first research paper. We did the work, we built this interface, we submitted it to a conference. I will not name the conference. And this is one of my reviews. This was an actual review. It was not a critical assessment of my work whatsoever. It was a comment. It was actually longer than this. The person in question said, the authors are making a bigger deal of this whole mobile space. No one will ever use their phone to search the web. And what I'd like to hopefully prove by the end of this talk is that this person was very, very wrong. Is the person in the room? No.
You can't ask that question.
No. Okay. So, one, I want to convince you that the person was wrong. My parents would actually say that I completed my PhD entirely to prove this individual wrong. I'm not that obsessive, I promise. I'm just excited by this space. Okay, so just to introduce myself a little more, my name is Karen Churc. I've spent the past 10 years trying to understand what mobile people do with their phones, in particular how they search and browse the web. I'm very excited by people, and I'm very excited by the mobile space. I've been based at Telefonica Research. Does everyone know who Telefonica is? No? Yeah, kind of. Basically a huge mobile operator. They're based in mainly in Spain and in a lot of Latin America, and they also, the company in Germany called O2, they're in the UK as well, so they also own those. And they set up a research team in 2006, a group of research scientists to try and kind of look towards the future. And I know you probably say, well, why is an operator interested in search? It's not necessarily that they're interested in building the next search engine, it's more along the lines of the more we can learn about mobile users, and in Telefonica's case, mobile customers, the more equipped we will be to build new services that will enrich their lives. So mobile search has probably been around for about 8 years. And today I want to take like a nostalgic look back. I want to show you kind of a little bit about what it looked like when I began in this space, what it looks like now, and kind of how we got there, the things that we've learned along the way. I'm going to show you some applications and interfaces that I think are pretty cool. There will be a lot of the word user, so that's why I was delighted to see in Diane's keynote she talked about user studies every 2 seconds, so she has prepared you in advance. Okay, let's start. Did anyone have one of these phones? The Nokia? This was as smart as a smartphone was in 2003. It came with a camera and video capabilities, and it came with internet access, which was phenomenal at the time. When I worked in this space, the word WAP was still talked about. Does everyone remember WAP? WML? Did anyone ever build a mobile website? Anyway, so this is like vintage mobile web talk now. Did anyone ever access the internet through mobile portals? Do you remember this? The only way that you could actually access and consume content was through your operator. So there'd be this kind of little icon, you'd click on it, you'd wait 2 hours, eventually a page would load. And these portals would have kind of links to things like news and entertainment, and they generally included a link to a search facility, normally via Google or via Yahoo. And this was popular when I started. And Google, do you remember in 2005, Google's XHTML, this was their first version of mobile search. This was an image search. And then if you actually attempted to execute a standard web query, you would end up getting a list of 10 results, and you might be lucky if you could see half of the first one on the first screen. So flash forward to 2013, and these are the types of devices that not everyone uses, but we've come a long way. Sleek, beautiful, touchscreen interactions. Now you hear a lot about apps. There's an app for almost anything in the world. And also, you know, we don't really talk about WAP and WML anymore. We're starting to begin talking about HTML5 in particular, and what impact that has on future browsing experiences, given that it holds potential to actually access native mobile phone features from web pages, which is phenomenal. And mobile search, I wanted to include this because it's a little bit scary, I think. Is anyone familiar with Google Now? Yeah? Are you scared by Google Now? I was blown away when I used this first. So basically you can personalize kind of like this app's homepage and include cards to things that you use on a regular basis, things like maybe travel, flights, weather, but then it learns and it knows kind of things that you may be interested in. I don't know what it uses to provide this information, but this is kind of search reimagined, you know. It supports voice search queries, and it's much more proactive. They've moved away from this kind of I input a query and then I get a set of results, which I think is super cool. Does anyone here work in the mobile computing space? One. One of the things that I wanted to at least start with is to try and explain a little bit about what makes the mobile space very different than the desktop space. A lot of people have tried to take standard web applications and basically shrink them and make them kind of fit on mobile screens. And it doesn't really work that way because mobile is fundamentally different than desktop. And while smartphones have evolved the space considerably, I don't believe that they're ever going to be the same thing. And there's a few reasons why. Mobile phones are highly personal. You rarely share them with anybody. You own them. Your mobile phone number, it's part of your identity. All your contacts are on it. Your phone calls are on it. If I asked a person in this room, can I borrow your laptop to check my mail? You may not like that I do that, but I'd probably find a person. If I asked you, can I borrow your phone? I guarantee your heart skips a beat. Oh my God, not my phone, she'll know, she'll find out, you know? So I think this is something that we don't necessarily have that relationship with our desktops. The second thing is you hear an awful lot about context and the role it plays on mobile behaviors, and most people think about location, but it's not simply location. Temporal factors play a very important role, the person's activity play a role, and so too do our social conversations, our social interactions. And it's been shown in the past that those 4 forms of context in particular are highly influential for mobile users and their behaviors. Mobile users tend to seek very fresh information, so I need to know something, I need it now, I need it in this situation, and in 2 minutes' time I will have moved on from this place, I will have moved on from this situation, and therefore the need is no longer valid. Or the other thing is that our mobile phones provide us with access to kind of anything, anytime, anywhere, and that's something that maybe tablets have managed to do a little bit more, but desktops will never really be able to do. There's also really interesting research, normally within the UbiComp kind of mobile HCI domains, that actually prove that your mobile phone is generally very, very close to you. So 50% of smartphone users have their phone with them within arm's reach, and 90% within phone's reach. Most people, before they leave the house, will check for wallet, keys, and phone. The other thing I wanted to point out before kind of talking about the research that's been conducted in the mobile web space is that mobile, one of the reasons why I love it as well, but it's inherently challenging, and despite the advances that have been made, there are still some things that are really problematic. This is a very old slide, and the phones are old. Most of them are probably obsolete, but the point I wanted to make is that unlike the desktop space, we have to deal with thousands of different phone types, screen sizes, OS types. The interactions, input, and so forth are very different from one model to another, and that makes designing enriching experiences very difficult. Also, despite the fact that we've come a long way, everyone talks about smartphones, we still deal with tiny, tiny screens in comparison to desktops and even laptops. So it means that the information we present on that screen needs to be super relevant. And again, we all talk about touch screens and touch gestures, but input is still tedious. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've tried to type a text message or a WhatsApp message, it never gets the character wrong, and then decides to predict what it thinks you are trying to say, and almost always gets it wrong. And the final point that makes mobile very challenging is the fact that by its nature, mobile users will often have their attention divided between tasks, and they'll often be trying to, multitask. And that's not necessarily something, I'm not saying that a person sitting on a desktop won't be thinking about something else, but when a person is mobile, their entire environment is changing all the time, and that makes designing kind of focused, enriching experiences very difficult for them. Most researchers like numbers, so I thought I'd include some numbers in terms of how big the mobile space really is and how big mobile search in particular is. So there are 7 billion people in the world, around about. And of those 7 billion, there are actually 6 billion mobile phone subscriptions. So that's basically implying that almost everybody in the world has a mobile phone. That's not necessarily true. The 6 billion counts people who have 2 mobile phones and so forth, but it's getting close. And to give you some comparison, the latest number from the Worldwide Internet Stats Forum have shown that 2.5 billion people can access the internet. 6 billion of them have a phone. I think that's a pretty amazing difference. In terms of smartphones, we hear a lot about smartphones. They are definitely being adopted, but it's nowhere near the rate that people kind of think. 1 billion smartphone users in existence, so what that means is that most mobile users are still trying to access, consume, and interact with content via old feature phones. In terms of growth, mobile internet traffic has skyrocketed in the last 3 years in particular. What this graph shows is basically the percentage of mobile traffic as a percentage of total internet traffic, and in 2009 it was just 1%, and at the end of 2012 it has risen to 13%. And what they're actually saying is that by 2015, more users will access the internet via their phones than PCs. So maybe when we're designing the systems that we talk about at places like this, we need to think about it's not always just going to be desktop users who are interacting with those. Search has long been a friend to people who've tried to access and consume content online. ComScore released these stats every month or so. In December 2012, 18 billion search queries were submitted across major search engines. I think this number is for the US. 25% of them come from mobile devices. In 2007, it was 1 in 7. Now it's 1 in 4. And they're saying that by the end of 2013, 1 in 3 queries will actually come from a mobile handset. So given this massive growth in the last 10 years in particular, there's been a number of studies that aim to try and understand what it is that mobile users do when they access and consume online content. So they look at how, what, where, when, and the why of mobile search and mobile web behaviors. Some researchers have taken a massive step back and have tried to actually look at what are the types of information needs that those users are actually trying to address. And other researchers have then tried to take what we've learned and determine what type of applications and interfaces can we build that would enrich their experiences. These studies can be split in 2 parts. The first are data-centric. This is your typical large-scale query log analysis studies. They're great, a lot of people, a lot of users. They reflect real-life usage. And they're very good at answering kind of how people behave and maybe what they do. But they're not super great at answering the why question, and that's something that I in particular are very interested in. So I wanted to talk to you about a second set of studies that are much more user-focused. These are things like diary studies, surveys, and what researchers in this line tried to do is understand, well, what motivates that usage? Why do people actually do that? What are their frustrations? What are their underlying intents? And what are their perceptions of their experiences? So let's start with the how. The how mobile user search has been answered, or at least it's continuing to be answered. And there are a number of researchers working in this space since around 2005, 2006, all via either query log analysis taken from major search engines like Google and Yahoo, or from actual mobile operators. I'm going to take kind of like key results from each of these papers, but I've included the references for those who may be interested in reading some of these. I think if you're going to read one paper, a query log analysis study of mobile search, I'd recommend the last one. It was published in World Wide Web 2009 by Canver and colleagues from Google, and what was really nice is they actually started to compare computer versus iPhone versus other mobile phone behaviors, and they've shown that there are many differences. Yahoo also have a number of studies, one conducted in Japan, another which compares US versus international mobile search, and the most recent one at World Wide Web 2011 actually is looking at the impact of voice queries. And then the final set are what I call mobile operator studies. The work that I've conducted in the space is mainly in conjunction with mobile operators in Europe. And the difference is that rather than me having access to the transaction log from a single search engine, I have access to the transaction log of all online interactions for a mobile user. So I can pick out kind of search versus browsing behavior, and also maybe compare what they might do on one search engine versus another. So some of the results, probably intuitively, mobile queries are a lot shorter than desktop queries. When we started working in this space, they were on average about 2 terms in length, very similar to the early days of standard web search, but they are actually growing in length. This table tries to take out key results from the studies that I mentioned before. And if you focus on, so just to clarify something, this is the year of the publication, and I included the year of the data set because I think that the dataset year is probably more important. Basically, if you look at the earliest Google one, the average query length was 2.3 terms. And in their most recent study, which used data from 2008, what they've shown is that queries are increasing, but mainly just for iPhone users. So their iPhone users, the query lengths are actually much more in line with their desktop counterparts. And what this paper, this is why I would kind of say if you want to read, if you're going to read one, maybe read this one. This paper actually has a number of great analyses that show that iPhone behaviors, mobile search behaviors, are much more in line with desktop search behaviors than other mobile phone groupings. So what the authors hypothesize is that perhaps people are taking their desktop standard web search experiences and essentially mapping them to smartphones. We're actually trying to do some work related to this right at the moment, where we're comparing iPhone versus Android search behavior, and there are even differences within that. So I think it can have significant implications, even when it comes to ranking. The second key thing is that mobile queries are far less diverse than desktop queries. Again, this is changing as mobile handsets have advanced. If we have a look, again, I've taken out the Google studies. So the top query from their analysis in 2000, from using a data set from 2005, the top query represented 1.2% of all queries in their data set. And more recently, again, focusing on iPhone, that's now just 0.3. And what this means is that iPhone users, mobile users, are executing more diverse queries. Most people say that as technology evolves, becomes more advanced, users will try to search for new things, they'll get interested in new types of content, they'll start to understand that they can actually search for anything they like. So this is a sign of evolution, but what I think is interesting is that when you focus on mobile-specific devices, the ones that aren't necessarily smartphones, these sets of users still search using very short query terms and for similar items. In the kind of web search space, click-throughs or click patterns, at least in the past, used to be used as a form of success. If a user executed a query and they clicked on something, surely they found the answer to that. And if we're using that same logic, then what past research has shown is that mobile search is far less successful than desktop search. In the early days, in 2005 and 2006, less than 10% of queries issued from mobile users resulted in a click-through. More recently, this number has increased to around 50%. One of the things I thought that would be interesting to mention related to this is that mobile users often seek direct answers. They're not looking for an experience where they basically submit a query and then have to kind of sift through pages and pages of results. They're never going to browse online for hours. the more that we can provide direct answers to their queries immediately in the search result page, the more likely their experience will be a good one. The problem is, how do we evaluate that success? And I thought I'd include a screenshot from some of the things that, I mean, a number of the major search engines these days are doing this anyway, but they're providing direct answers to queries within the search engine result page. I'm not sure how you would entirely measure success based on this, but I think this is a very nice direction, and it's been shown that mobile users find that this is very, very useful. So that's a little bit about how mobile users search and how their search behaviors have evolved. In terms of what mobile users are interested in, can anyone make a guess as to the most popular query category in the mobile space?
Addresses. Addresses.
Addresses?
Yeah.
It begins with an A. They're most interested in adult-related content. Yeah, so basically, and this was a very similar trend that was found in the early days of web search as well. In the first study I conducted in this, over 50% of the queries were pornographic, or in looking for pornographic content. The year after I did this, which was 2006, I think, it increased to over 60%. What Canva and the great people at Google are finding out, though, is that it is decreasing, okay? And in particular for iPhone users and smartphone users, their desire to search for adult-related content is at least decreasing, and we found a very similar trend within standard web search patterns. I think it'd be really interesting to explore why this is the case. There are a little bit of hypotheses which say, given what I talked about, this fact that your mobile phone is highly personal, it's yours, you don't share it, you can do kind of what you want with it, and no one will ever know, and perhaps there's something in that. So there's maybe a research area for someone out there, understanding adult-related searches from mobile phones. The other thing that you would assume that mobile users search a lot for is queries with local intent, given that location is a key contextual factor and something that's of relevance and importance to them. The percentage of queries with local intent is actually very low. In the very early days, in 2005, 2006, it actually was lower than 5%. And what's really interesting, again, that Google study, when they compared iPhone to desktop and to other mobile phone types, the percentage of local queries issued on iPhones is actually just a very small percentage, higher than what is executed on desktops. And what the authors of that paper hypothesize is that basically the reason is not because mobile users are not interested in location-based information. It's that they tend to use alternative sources and they don't use web search engines to do it. Given that we have these beautiful maps applications, there are an awful lot of location-based services, Foursquare, you can tweet your location, you can add your location on Facebook. We don't necessarily need to use a search engine for that when there are applications that offer much more enriching experiences, in particular at an interaction level. But it would be very interesting to actually explore the types of things that they search for within these environments. What Google have shown now is that 50% of all their queries have local intent. And it seems to be the way forward, in particular for mobile users. So again, this would be interesting to explore. One of the things that I find really mind-blowing about mobile users is there's stats from a marketing firm that, and other researchers have hinted at this as well, that say that 70% of mobile searches lead to an action within 1 hour. An action is where you would actually make a phone call, you might book a restaurant, you might actually take the train on your commute home. And when it's compared to desktop, 70% of desktop searches lead to an action within 1 month. I think that's amazing, and towards the end I'm going to talk about how I think we can make mobile web experiences much more actionable. The major search engines are starting, so do you remember the way I showed that direct answers in the search result pages, and if, for example, it's a place, it will provide a direct link to call that restaurant, and then the person can action upon that from within the web browser. Things like this, I think, will help enrich mobile user experiences. So that's a little bit about how and what mobile users search for. One of the things that I'm really interested in is why they use mobile search, what motivates them. Taylor et al., most of the research related to this is generally published in the likes of CHI or Mobile HCI conferences. There's great work by Taylor et al. At CHI 2008, which actually conducted a study, a small-scale study, that basically looked at what were the major motivators for mobile web usage. And what they found is that awareness and time management were the top two motivators. Awareness would be the desire to stay up to date, to be kept informed. This is things like checking email, checking Facebook, checking Twitter. Time management would be things like where you are searching for something because your desire is to kind of stay efficient or to plan for things. So that would be things like checking bus timetables, checking maps, trying to find out the directions to something would generally be categorized in that time management motivator. Things like diversion and social avoidance do actually exist. Diversion is you're just using your phone because you desire to kill time, you're bored. Social avoidance, and I'd love to see a show of hands as to who's done this. So someone you think is maybe approaching you and then you look at your phone so that you can completely avoid that random stranger? No? Yes, one person. We conducted a diary study about 2 years ago to try and look at what are the motivators of mobile web usage, in particular among active smartphone users. And we were trying to figure out what was lacking from their experiences. And we classified the diary entries according to the Taylor et al. Categories and confirmed that, yes, even a few years later among smartphone users, their motivators were mainly still that awareness and time management. But when we took a closer look at mobile search, things changed. And this is an area that I've been working in mainly in the last year, and I'm really excited about it. Basically, what we find is that when you look at mobile search, there's a much higher proportion of trivia and fact-finding queries, as well as informational searches. And it turns out that most of these are actually heavily influenced by our conversations that we have. Curiosity, plays a role. And in particular, this thing of settling a bet or proving someone wrong. Has anyone been in a bar and you've started talking about the latest movie that someone has been in, you have an argument, and how do you solve that argument now? You take out your phone and you do a search. What did people do 10 years ago? So we, in particular, have started looking at this kind of social dynamic, this influence of conversations, and how search engines can maybe enrich those experiences. Here's some of the comments that were actually made. So most of the users in the study either wanted to settle an argument or they would use it as a form of recall. So when this person was having lunch with colleagues and they couldn't remember the character name of Graham Norton in Father Ted. Has anyone seen Father Ted? Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Another comment from another person was having an argument about the history of the dance, the moonwalk, and basically used a search engine to prove his or her brother wrong. And there's an awful lot of these actors in movies, a lot of these kind of entertainment-related intents, where people use search engines to kind of answer those. Okay, where do you think people use search engines? On their mobile phones, mainly, the number one location.
The television.
Yay, I should have like a little prize or something for the person who gets the questions right. This I thought was really interesting. So years ago, people would only ever really use their phone to search and browse the web when they were mobile. Because, being honest, it cost a lot of money, interfaces weren't that great, you had to access kind of via the operators' portals. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I've included the reference to it, but there's been great work that looked in particular at where mobile users, from a user-centric point of view, where mobile users search and browse the web. And they found, I think it was 2 years ago, that it was 3 years ago, that it was around 40% was actually at home or work. And when we did this in 2011, it was 70% was at home or work. And in particular, this thing of watching TV is a big one. And the main reason, laziness. Convenience. Why bother taking out my laptop when my beautiful friend is beside me? Doesn't take up that much space. I have Wi-Fi at home. I think this is a huge thing as well. They're not having to pay really for their connection, or at least the perception is that they're not paying a lot for it. Does anyone ever get in trouble for doing this? For their significant other, friends, family, children?
My son.
Yeah, okay. I've been in many arguments as well, yeah. And this is something that we're looking in particular at this moment, because a lot of people deem it like either very rude, you're not paying attention. So we're trying to figure out how users cope with such stresses and strains on their relationships caused by mobile web access. In terms of when mobile users search, I think this is pretty interesting and somewhat intuitive. By the way, this is not real numbers. I made this pretty graph to kind of demonstrate a point, and it's been shown that tablet use is generally more in the morning, and particular at night. Desktop in general is more during the day. And mobile phone, while it may not be higher, is just much more sporadic in nature. And the reason is because you kind of carry it around with you. So you can check it waiting at the bus, waiting in the coffee line. I mean, it's always with you. So it creates this kind of burst in terms of time periods. And in particular, when we focused in that diary study, when we actually looked at when were the searches executed by users, it was generally, there was no pattern really. It was kind of random spikes throughout the day. And this is really in particular just to satisfy needs that randomly arise, most of them sparked maybe by random thoughts, random conversations. And in terms of who, do you think most people are alone when they search? When you use mobile search? Most of the time, are you alone when you use mobile search? Yes? Yeah? Most mobile searches, on a general level, actually occur with at least another person. And, sorry, that can also be another person that you are not paying attention to, which is what we just talked about, where you are actually interacting with your phone. But the whole point is you are in the presence of other people. Jamie from Microsoft Research, they've done some very nice, a really nice survey looking at local mobile search behavior, and they found the same thing. So 67% of searches conducted, in particular while mobile, were conducted in the presence of someone else. And most of the time, the person in your presence tends to be someone that you know very well, a person that you're close to. And this is something that we've actually started to study in the last year, which is in what types of situations do people use mobile search in social settings, but to satisfy shared needs for information. Okay. I mentioned before that aside from looking at kind of how and what and why people use search, that some researchers have actually decided to take a look back and to try and understand a bit more about what are the underlying information needs that mobile users are actually trying to address. How they satisfy those needs, and be it through web search or browsing or via some other means. And the goal is that if I can understand more about their underlying needs, I can identify maybe gaps in services, gaps in their experiences, and then try and come up with something cool or new that will help them. I won't go into too much detail about these, but there are a number of researchers working in this space at the moment. Most of the studies are, again, diary study approaches, maybe conducted over a month or two. What we tried to do last year was to do a user study on a larger scale. So that was where we recruited about 100 people for a 3-month period in Spain. And again, 3 months isn't long, but in the HCI world, it's pretty long. And the idea was that rather than asking people, if you're familiar with diary studies, in general you have to ask people to remember to report their experiences, to remember to answer questions. And one of the issues with this approach is that, well, often people forget. And what we thought is, why not use mobile technology, and in particular something that operators have access to, and that's SMS. So what we did was we probed our participants not at inappropriate times, at appropriate times, but when their context was changing, when they were, let's say, traveling between home and work, when they would wake up in the morning, to ask them explicitly, was there anything that they needed recently? And then they could reply free of charge via SMS and tell us if they needed something. And then later on that evening, they would fill in an online diary, but the SMS would serve as like a memory trigger. It would remind them of where they were, who they were with. And what we found is that internet in particular for mobile users, is definitely a useful means of satisfying their day-to-day needs, but that there are some needs that mobile users have, in particular of a personal nature, or that they believe that a search engine will never know the answer to, and that they will find alternative means of answering, in particular asking other people. So this idea of social search or relying on other people, I think, is an interesting area, in particular for mobile users. And I've included some references for those of you who might be interested. And the last thing I thought I'd talk about was, well, what's been kind of happening in the last few years at an interface, an application, or an interaction level. The first work I thought I'd mention, because it was very, very, very innovative at the time, was work done by Carlson et al. Called FaThumb, and this is where they tried to come up with like a novel approach to navigating through hierarchical metadata on mobile phones. The idea was that you would use these facets to navigate through different forms of content, and you would only really input a query or input text when you had kind of already driven down to the category that you really wanted to know. And basically, this was working off a standard old kind of 9 keypad mobile phone, and you would use the numbers to navigate between these tiles. Other work, mobile Findex. So this was, again, on the basis that maybe we should do something of a categorical nature to try and improve experiences of users. So rather than just having a query and, again, search results, maybe we could actually do something at a categorization level that would allow them to filter first, to navigate first, and then to execute a query later if they wanted to. There's also been a lot of work done on exploratory mobile search interfaces. This was a prototype called Questions Not Answers from Swansea University, and the idea is that if I was to show you every query that other people in this room had executed in this physical location, it gives you it might give you an enriched sense of place. Okay, so that was their premise. Their premise was, rather than building an interface where mobile users are expected to submit a query and then they're given some information, what can we do at an interface level to give them information before asking them to do anything? And what we did was, so for the Jones et al. Paper, they basically plotted queries based on location on a map. What we thought would be interesting, and based on the diary studies and so forth that I mentioned, is that in often cases mobile users have needs that they never think of asking a search engine for because they don't think the search engine will have the answer to it. Or maybe it's something that they'd prefer to get from friends. So we thought, well, what about combining mobile web search with the proactive interface and with the social component? So the idea was, again, we mapped all the queries that people entered via this application on a Google map. Users could interact with those queries. So that is, they could view the search results that other people have seen. They could answer those queries either via the application or via a Facebook application. And then the idea was we connected peers of friends, so you could actually look at how close of a relationship you had with that person. And we tried to examine a little bit about whether the proactive interface enriched their experience, and in particular what happened when you added that social component in. What we thought was amazing, and maybe people who are already working in the social space know this, I didn't know this before I worked on it, we built what we thought was a proactive mobile search interface. And once we added a social component, in particular that connected people who knew each other, they used and appropriated that application for something that it wasn't designed for. So it ended up being more of a tool used for syncing, for meeting, for letting friends know what you were doing, rather than actually executing queries and seeing a set of results. So it's just anyone who's working in mobile, it's kind of challenging, and then once you add in that social component, you don't really know what people are going to end up doing. Other work by Microsoft that I thought would be useful to mention is this an application called trajectory-aware mobile search, and it's where, so they're taking a local search scenario, and what they're trying to do is predict where you're actually going to go, and actually provide you with results at your destination location rather than where you are currently now. Because most of the time, maybe you're looking for something close by, but it's likely that you're going to go at least 2 minutes in one direction to find something. So they've built this prototype and they evaluated it. I think this could be something very fruitful, in particular for location-based mobile search queries. So there are just some examples of some of the things that have been happening at an interface or an application level, at least within the research community, not necessarily at an industrial level. And I wanted to include with maybe some of the areas that I think could be useful to pursue going forward. One of the things is that most people assume that mobile users, they're using mobile phones and they are mobile, and they're not mobile. Often cases, they're at home or at work. And I think that there is a lot of interest in trying to understand what it means when a person is truly mobile versus what happens when they use their mobile in non-mobile settings. So we still know that when a mobile user is out and about, when they're actually physically in transit, oftentimes they will search for things when they need to know things, they need to know it now. But when you're at home, maybe you don't care. So if we could understand a little bit more about these two different use cases, how people behave differently in these two different use cases, and then maybe try and build services around those two use cases, that could be something that's enriching. Also, I mentioned before that there was a lot of these casual mobile searches, this settling bets, proving someone wrong. That's again a completely different need than needing to know how to get from A to B when you're in a strange city. And I would assume that the interfaces that we need to build, or the interactions that we need to build to support more casually search behavior versus need to know something is different. And I think this is something that could be fruitful to explore. Mobile does not mean smartphone. Most people in the world access and consume content through feature phones. And what I find really interesting is that the mobile phone, for a number of people in the world, will be their first point of contact to online content, because they will never have had a PC or a desktop or a laptop. And the way in which they will use and appropriate their phones is going to be, or it will likely be, very different to how people in the Western world have done it. So I think it would be useful to perhaps not focus so much on the smartphones of the world and to start paying attention to what we can do for more feature phone level devices, or high level feature phone devices that would enrich the experiences of these people, in particular because it will be their first time accessing and viewing online content. I mentioned before that mobile phones are not always used alone. In particular, you're often around people that you know, and understanding how that social context influences people's behaviours, and how we can build more enriching social mobile experiences, I think is really interesting, but it's also very, very, very difficult, because you have all of the challenges of mobile and all of the challenges of social and communities and people who are weird and wonderful, but I think it's exciting, but it's a challenging and difficult research space. The other thing is that I think we've come a long way in the last 10 years, in particular in the mobile web and mobile search space, but my personal take on it is that what we offer mobile users is still very much a watered down version of the web. We've taken web experiences and we've kind of done that, and we've ported them to mobile phones. People are definitely trying. They're doing things like providing direct answers in search results, maybe adding location, accessing the native phone features, maybe to enrich experiences. But I'd love to try and exploit the differences in the mobile space, and honestly try to build web services and search services that are truly actionable, that will allow mobile users do exactly what they intend to do, because it certainly isn't sit there and browsing through information. It's more than likely to help them fulfill a need or to do something else. And the last point I'd like to make is that, you know, I love mobile. I'm still very excited in this space. I've no desire to leave it, but it's not the end, you know. We've gone from desktop to tablet to smartphone. What's next, you know? We're probably going to have internet access in our TVs, in our cars. It's already here. In glasses, that's scary for me, but it's happening. So what's next, and how will behaviours change, and what types of interfaces and services should we be building to support that? Because it's not the end. And back to the reason why I'm here. I hope I have at least proved that this person is very, very wrong. I am not bitter. I forgive you. And that is it. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.